friends, it's Miss Kelly. I found a new place to read in the corner of my office, and I thought I would read a favorite book of my son Zach's and also my little brother Michael. And it's Curious George. Now, this is an old book. This author, I'll tell you when it was written, but it was written a long time ago. And the author's name is H.A. Ray. And a lot of you know Curious George. This is the first book that he wrote. And I'm reading it for one of my friends, Landon, who loves firefighters. And I'm sure a lot of you like monkeys. So this is Curious George. It's a long book, so if you want to pause the tape, you certainly can. Oh my goodness, look at that monkey. These are telephone wires. Sometimes we don't see them so often. Okay, let me see what year it was written. Oh my goodness, it's older than my mom. It was written in 1941. That is almost 80 years ago. Wowee. All right. This is George. He lived in Africa. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. Curious is a good thing. When you're curious, you're going to end up learning a lot. Curious is good. One day, George saw a man. He had on a large yellow straw hat. The man saw George too. What a nice little monkey, he thought. I would like to take him home with me. He put his hat on the ground, and of course, George was curious. He came down from the tree to look at the large yellow hat. I have a question for you. Do you think this man should just take George out of his home? I don't think he should. And George should be aware of strangers that might try to trick them. The hat had been on the man's head. George thought it would be nice to have it on his own head. He picked it up and put it on. Doesn't he look silly? The hat covered George's head. He couldn't see. The man picked him up quickly and popped him into a bag. George was caught. Oh, look at George's face. Do you think he's happy? The man with the big yellow hat put George into a little boat, and a sailor rowed them both across the water to a big ship. George was sad, but he was still a little curious. Now, doesn't the man look like he's going to be mean to George? Looks like he has his arm around him. Oh, what do you think George is curious about now? Those fish? I'm sure he's never been in a boat. On the big ship, things began to happen. The man took off the bag. George sat on a little stool, and the man said, George, I'm going to take you to a big zoo in a big city. You will like it there. Now run along and play, but don't get into trouble. George promised to be good, but it is easy for little monkeys to forget. I think it's easy for little kids to forget sometimes too. Maybe big kids too. On the deck, he found some seagulls. He wondered how they could fly. He was very curious. Finally, he had to try. It looked easy. Do you think a monkey can fly? What do you predict is going to happen? What do you think? Were you right? Oh, what happened? First this, and then this. Now what do you predict is going to happen? Oh my. Where is George? The sailors looked and looked. At last they saw him struggling in the water and almost all tired out. Do you think monkeys can swim? What should they do? What do you predict is going to happen? Man overboard, the sailors cried as they threw him a life belt. George caught it and held on, At last he was safe on board. Look at how the illustrator made it so silly. George is even spitting out fish. Oh my goodness. After that, George was more careful to be a good monkey until at last the long trip was over. George said goodbye to the kind sailors, and he and the man with the yellow hat walked off the ship onto the shore and on into the city to the man's house. I like this picture where George is holding, it looks like a passport, and his suitcase. Do you know what genre this is? It is definitely animal fantasy. Monkeys don't do this kind of stuff. So silly. Oh. After a good meal and a pipe. What? This was written a long time ago. We don't smoke pipes. After a good meal and a pipe, George felt very tired. He crawled into bed and fell asleep at once. The next morning, the man telephoned the zoo. George watched him. He was fascinated. Then the man went away. George was curious. He wanted to telephone too. 1, 2, 3. What comes after 5? 6, 7. What fun! Now take a look at that phone. That's a very old-fashioned phone. Remember I told you this book was written almost 80 years ago? That's what phones look like then. Not like our little cell phones, are they? Ding-a-ling-a-ling! George had telephoned the fire station. Friends, what number must he have called? What number do you call if you have an emergency? Not for fun. Right, 911, only for emergencies. The firemen rushed to the telephone. Hello, hello, they said, but there was no answer. Then they looked for the signal on the big map that showed where the telephone call had come from. They didn't know it was George. They thought it was a real fire. Oh no, what do you predict is going to happen? Hurry, hurry, hurry! The firemen jumped on the fire engines and onto the hook and ladders. Ding dong, ding dong. Everyone out of the way. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Look at those old-fashioned fire trucks. They don't look like our spiffy new ones, do they? Maybe you've been to a firehouse and you know how nice they look. The firemen rushed into the house. They opened the door. No fire! Only a naughty little monkey. Oh, catch him, they cried. George tried to run away. He almost did, but he got caught in the telephone wire. And what do you think will happen? Now, this doesn't really happen in real life. You know that. A thin fireman caught one arm, and a fat fireman caught the other. You fooled the fire department, they said. We will have to shut you up where you can't do any more harm. They took him away and shut him in prison. In jail? That's kooky. George wanted to get out. He climbed up to the window to try the bars. Just then the watchman came in. He got on the wooden bed to catch George, but he was too big and heavy. The bed tipped over, the watchman fell over, and quick as lightning, George ran out through the open door. He is one tricky monkey, isn't he? So crazy. Oh, look! Do you remember seeing this picture before in the beginning of the book? It's a little bit different. He hurried through the building and out onto the roof, and then he was lucky to be a monkey. Out he walked onto the telephone wires. Quickly and quietly over the guard's head, George walked away. He was free. Where do you think he'll go? Where would you go? I wonder. You're not going to believe it. Down in the street outside the prison wall stood a balloon man. A little girl bought a balloon for her brother. George watched. He was curious again. That means he's like, how does this work? I want to know how this works. Remember, I said, if you're curious, you're smart, and you'll learn a lot. He was curious again. He felt he must have a bright red balloon. He reached over and tried to help himself, but you are doing so many predictions today. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think the balloon man knows George is there? Instead of one balloon, the whole bunch broke loose. In an instant, the wind whisked them all away. And with them went George, holding tight with both hands. Could that really happen in real life? How many balloons are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Do you think if you had 12 balloons, you would float up to the sky? I wonder. I don't know if I'm that curious, though. Up, up he sailed, higher and higher. The houses looked like toy houses, and the people like dolls. George was very frightened. He held on very tight. Oh my, he is way, way up there. Now, what do you predict is going to happen? At first, the wind blew in great gusts. That means it was really strong. And then it quieted, just a little. Finally, it stopped blowing altogether. George was very tired. Down, down he went, bump, onto the top of a traffic light. Everyone was surprised. The traffic got all mixed up. George didn't know what to do, and then he heard someone call, "George!" He looked down and saw his friend, the man with the big yellow hat. Do you see him, friends? George was very happy. The man was happy too. George slid down the post, and the man with the big yellow hat put him under his arm. Then he paid the balloon man for all the balloons. And then George and the man climbed into the car, and at last away they went. I wonder where they're going. Do you think they're going home? I don't know. Oh, where did they go, friends? To the zoo. What a nice place for George to live. Look at all the animals there. So the zoo is kind of like Africa. Only in Africa he could run around free. So I hope you like this book. If you look behind me, you'll see my son Zach. He liked this book too. And it makes my heart warm when I read a book that I know that somebody I loved loved. I hope you loved it too. I'll see you soon.